Hi, good afternoon. I'm Betsy Lake, and I'm here with Robin Nichols and Sarah Allison, and we are going to present our PLC number 5. All of us have read chapters 7 and 8 from the Ellis textbook, and we're going to present the 3 most important topics that we found in there. I am going to start with my presentation, and I'm going to share my screen here. And I did a Venn diagram, and I included 3 hypotheses: the interaction hypothesis, noticing hypothesis, and output hypothesis. The first thing I want to start off by saying is, what is it that they all have in common? So here in this all section, I have input and interaction involve incidental acquisition, which manifests gradual changes in learners' implicit knowledge. So for all 3 of them, they all include input, how input is important, as well as interaction. Some other pieces that we do see in both, like a lot of these theories, whether it's 1 or 2, is this noticing and negotiation, and focus on output. So I want to start off talking about the noticing hypothesis, and this was founded by Schmidt in 1994 and 2001. And it kind of comes from this original Krashen's idea in 1985, which is the input hypothesis. Krashen's hypothesis, the input hypothesis, proposed that if input is comprehensible, grammar is going to be automatic. So if input is good, that learners are automatically going to be able to give good output. That was kind of his idea. Now, the noticing hypothesis by Schmidt kind of disagreed with it a little bit, had a different proposition. So the noticing hypothesis believes that input works best for acquisition when learners pay conscious attention to forms and the meanings they convey. So it kind of takes it, I guess, a step further than that original input hypothesis. Also, I want to give a little bit more information about Schmidt. In chapter 8, Ellis goes a little deeper with it, and this comes from page 182 in the textbook. And I kind of want to just share a snippet about that. So Schmidt's ideas about the importance of noticing, this is a noticing hypothesis, originated in his experiences of learning L2 Portuguese in Brazil. So this was kind of his experience and why he came up with this idea. So what happened was Schmidt kept a diary to establish which features in the input he consciously attended to. His output was then examined to see what extent the notice forms turned up in his communicative speech. In nearly every case, the forms that Schmidt produced were those that he had previously noticed in the input. Schmidt also reported that he noticed the differences between his own attempt to produce Portuguese and the native speaker input he was exposed to, which he called noticing the gap. So I kind of focus on that here. Noticing the gap is when learners are able to recognize differences between the input they receive and their own output, which is what we were able to see in Schmidt's experience. How can we see this occur in the classroom? One of the examples that was in chapter 7 talked about extensive reading and also how debates about material is very beneficial. And what we saw was a study with Rodrigo, Krashen, and Gibbons in 2004. And the study was, there was 3 groups. There was an extensive reading group with graded books, and then a reading discussion model that incorporated students reading the material and then coming and debating and discussing this material together. The 3rd group was a group that did not do this. What they found in the study was the extensive reading and reading discussion groups outperformed the 3rd group that was taught by a normal grammar class. So it wasn't so focused on reading, it was focused just on grammar. And the result was these other 2 groups excelled in vocab and grammar skills. So as far as looking at acquisition from a vocabulary standpoint, it would make sense that reading was really beneficial. Because it was really, the learners were really able to see, they were able to notice how, the first language was written and compare it to their language abilities. However, I guess 2 things I want to point out with this study was they did say it wasn't great for level readers. So if someone wasn't a very good reader, it might be hard for them to recognize the difference in their writing capabilities and the written text. And also there's really no claim on speech in acquisition here because it's really all just looking at written form. So now going to interaction hypothesis, this comes from Long in 1983 and 1996. And Long proposes that input and output are equally important for acquisition. Long argues that interactive input is more important than comprehensible input because it helps learners identify problem areas in their linguistic forms. So kind of you see that difference then between the noticing hypothesis and interaction. Noticing hypothesis kind of still focuses on that input, where interaction says, yes, input is important, however, interaction is more important. Then we also see this negotiation of meaning versus negotiation of form that comes from page 167. And I want to define those real quick for you. So the negotiation of meaning, actually, hold on. Oops, sorry. Negotiation of form, which is like the negotiation triggered by purely linguistic problems, is different than negotiation of meaning that actually looks at like the meaning of negotiation, like what's the reason behind it. But in the chapter here, it says both negotiation of meaning and form involve the same set of negotiation strategies, which differ in terms of whether they are input providing or output prompting or implicit versus explicit. So there's this focus on this interaction hypothesis in these two areas. How can we see the interaction hypothesis play out in the classroom? We see this in activities that focus on interaction between students and the teacher. So I also have in parentheses there, non-native speaker versus native speaker. And the learning is interaction based instead of grammar based. So we kind of see the difference there. Where these two, there is a similarity between them is they both kind of are looking at this Krashen's hypothesis, input hypothesis. And we see that this noticing and negotiation play a role in both, especially I think negotiation, because when you're interacting with people and you're asking questions, you're talking, like there kind of is this natural negotiation, especially between a teacher and a learner. My last hypothesis I'd like to go over is the output hypothesis. I want to say a similarity between them, interaction and output that I just went over, is that input and output are both important. So where we saw with the other side, with the other two areas, input was kind of more the focus. We're going to see the output hypothesis focuses on output. Doesn't that make sense? Output hypothesis is especially pushed that output is important. And this can be seen when the learner modifies their own output after negotiation with another speaker. The argument that I found here was it could be that the learner is just parroting the teacher. So how do we really know if we're seeing acquisition here? However, the results seem to be positive in the long term, so therefore it could be beneficial, right? And then in the classroom, we see the teacher or the native speaker gently corrects the student or the non-native speaker by getting him or her to question their output and modify it. So the learner may also ask for clarification. I wanted to show kind of a good example if you wanted to turn to this page with me on page 159. So we can kind of see this play out there. So on page 159, we see this first example 5, where the learner actually asks for clarification. So they recognize that they may have missed something or not heard a word correctly. So the first speaker, which is like the native speaker, says, Einstein's scientific work helps Americans make the nuclear bomb. The non-native says, clear bomb? Asking a question. The native speaker says, no, nuclear bomb. So the native repeats it a couple times. And then the non-native says, nuclear bomb. Ah, I see. But the thing is, they would again have to notice that there was an issue. Like they would have to recognize they think they heard it wrong. Because if they didn't, then it may be, I don't really know how beneficial this strategy is, I guess. And then in this other example that we see on the same page, example 6, we see that the learner says, after he was waiting for her every day, and then the native speaker says, waiting and waiting, just to kind of affirm what the learner said. Then the learner said, but she never came back. The native speaker says she never came back. So she's kind of getting, again, I'm saying she, could be he, we don't know, is getting the learner to recognize, hey, you made an error here, right? And then the learner goes, never came back. He was very sad, so was able to modify it. So I personally like the output hypothesis. I think it could be really beneficial. I can see how I can use that in the classroom, and I do currently, and I'm assuming you both do also. But these were the 3 hypotheses that we're focused on in chapter 7. I think they all bring important characteristics to the table, and we can learn from all of them. And again, it focuses on the input, how important comprehensible input is, and interaction in order to have acquisition, second language acquisition. So that is the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening. And I'm going to turn it over to Robin Nichols.
Hi. Thank you, Sarah. That was very informative. I am going to talk about cognition and input. And I'm going to briefly go over a little bit of the theories that Betsy talked about. I'm really not going to go over them in detail because she did. So, hold on. Stop share. Why won't it work? There we go. Let's try that. I'm going to go ahead and go over. There we go. The input hypothesis was solidified by Stephen Krashen in 1985, and it was actually a wrap-up of 5 previous hypotheses that he developed: the acquisition learning, the monitor, the natural order, the input, and the effective filter. And like I said, I won't go over all of these because we have covered these previously. The noticing hypothesis was developed by Richard Schmidt in 1990, and that people learn about the things they attend to and do not learn much about from the things they do not attend to. And that was like what Betsy said, him noticing his language acquisition skills in Brazil. And the output hypothesis was developed by Merrill Swain in 1985. Output plays an important role in second language acquisition, and comprehensible input is not sufficient, that students must engage in pushed output. And the thing that I really want to think about with this is whether we as teachers and native speakers do this consciously or subconsciously. And that was kind of the undercurrent that I was noticing when I was reading. And I'm going to get to that with procedural versus declarative knowledge, processability theory, and also implicit versus explicit learning. So that's kind of the thing that I really focused on. The input and the output, and if you'll want to follow along with me, it is on page 144. And interactive versus non-interactive input and non-interactive, and there's a tree on page 144 if you want to follow along. And this is based on Krashen's theory about just having this input, just getting all kinds of input. The non-interactive input is modified versus unmodified, where unmodified is just a straight text where you get the text like for a native English speaker that would understand what is going on. And with pre-modified, non-interactive, unmodified versus pre-modified, in pre-modified, the text is modified in some way, either to make it more descriptive or simpler. And interactive is interactionally modified versus output, where interactionally modified is simplified through, simplified through the process of interaction. That is when learners signal their failure to comprehend. And that goes back to kind of a negotiation of meaning. And then for output, you also have modified versus non-modified, where non-modified is unmodified is if the learner makes no attempt to modify an initial utterance. And modified output is the learner attempts to reformulate what has just been said for clarification or for feedback. And you know what? I noticed this even as a native English speaker when I'm talking to my my assistant principal, which is my direct supervisor, who's my direct supervisor, and she tells me something, and something that I've subconsciously picked up on, even though we are both native English speakers, is when she says something to me, I tell her, okay, let me tell you that back in my own way so we understand the gist of what you were saying. And it's that negotiation of meaning. And usually it's not a negotiation of form because we are both native English speakers, but it is a negotiation of meaning so we understand. So I understand clearly what instructions she has given me and that I can do what she asks me to do with no questions asked. No, I understand and I will get what she asks of me right the first time. So let's see, did we talk about that? Yes. Okay, we talked about that. So the next thing I want to talk about is register and discourse, and this goes into it is on page oh, here we go. It's on page 148, discourse management and repair, and this talks about negotiation of meaning and negotiation of form. It talks about discourse management, and we also talk about foreigner talk and teacher talk and how we modify our speech in order to acquire that negotiation of meaning and the negotiation of form. We use teacher talk and we use foreigner talk. And foreigner talk was coined by Charles Ferguson in 1971. And it talks about how we intentionally, or we subconsciously, but we do simplify our sentences. And what I notice sometimes, that sometimes if we modify our talk, we may do the person that we are talking to a social injustice. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but sometimes I've noticed when others, I wouldn't say, well, I'll go ahead and say maybe talk down to somebody that speaks another language. And it is a, oh, what's the word? Y'all help me out. What's the word I'm looking for? When they kind of, like a, oh shoot, what's the word I'm looking for, y'all? Help me out.
Can you describe it a little more? I'm not quite sure.
So let's say that you're talking or you're watching somebody talking to somebody else and they're talking.
Oh, demeaning. Demeaning.
No, not necessarily meaning, but where they look down upon that person because they're like, oh, you need to la 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 la, and they're oh shoot, what's the word I'm looking for? I got it in my head. Like an intentional talk down to by using that simplified form.
Not discriminatory.
Yeah, but kind of discriminatory. Yeah, that's the word. That's not quite what I was looking for, but it's kind of discriminatory because you're intentionally talking. Huh?
Belittling?
What?
Belittling?
Yeah. Yeah, kind of belittling.
That's all I got, Robin.
Like having like prejudice against somebody.
Yeah, kind of prejudice, kind of belittling. Yeah, but there was a word, but those will do.
Okay.
But there was a specific word I was looking for. But yeah, so foreigner talk, teacher talk, and it can be, and it's probably in the book, and I'm not even thinking about it. Omission of grammatical functions or expansion. When you as inserted before an imperative verb, we can recognize this as the understood you, but you instead and not even placing the emphasis on you as in you need to go to wherever, using that kind of that foreigner talk subconsciously, and it is kind of discriminatory, kind of belittling, like saying, oh, just because you talk a different language, that kind of implies that you are not very intelligent. And it is kind of discriminatory. And I've noticed that a little bit sometimes. And some things, as a side note, I've noticed sometimes if a person has an interpreter, that the person speaking will look at the interpreter rather than the person that is actually receiving the information, so to speak. So, I've noticed that a little bit too. I don't know. It was interesting.
Okay,
And that
I hate to interrupt you. I have a really interesting point on that.
Okay.
So I actually took a class on that, interpreting.
Okay.
And that's actually partly a fault of the interpreter.
Huh.
Because the interpreter should be trying to engage the two parties.
Really?
And kind of staying out. Yep. So that could be partly the interpreter's location, like where they're sitting, or yeah. So the interpreter's job is actually to make it so the other two parties are communicating to each other.
Interesting. Almost. I really didn't.
So anyway, yeah, I took a class on it because I was fascinated by it.
That is interesting.
All right, I'm done.
No. It happened to me. I was actually, so this is a side note, and this has nothing to do with my presentation, but I'm actually going to talk about this now that we mention it. I had a side gig as a presenter kind of thing, where you stand in front of the table and you have the trifold board and you're talking about a service that you're offering. And so I was repping a company. And that was my side gig, and it was actually kind of fun, but that's beside the point. And there was a Hispanic that came with an interpreter, and it was for educational services. And the interpreter came with the Hispanic woman. It was a mom, came with the interpreter, and so the interpreter interpreted. But I found myself talking to the interpreter, but then, and this is, I remember this clear as day. I remember thinking, that's not the right thing to do. I didn't know, I could not put into words why that was not the right thing to do. But I realized subconsciously that was not the right thing to do. So I switched my vision over to the mom and started talking to her. And I don't know how I realized that was not the right thing to do, but I did realize that I'm not providing educational services to the interpreter. I'm providing educational services to the child of the mother that is listening.
Wow, that's awesome that you caught on to it.
I didn't realize. I mean, I realized that I was talking to the interpreter and I didn't need to, but I could not put into words why. I guess I could, but I noticed that shift in my brain, but I really couldn't put it into words. It was just interesting. So anyway.
Well, and I think like for you and even for the Spanish speaker in that case, like there's this like sense of comfort with the interpreter, because like the interpreter can talk to you.
Right.
And same with the other lady that was standing there. And so like you find yourself talking to them because you're like, they get what I'm saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's good that you made the distinction of, but I'm actually the whole point is I'm trying to tell her about the service that I'm offering.
Yeah.
So it's a challenging thing because I looked into interpreting for a while. And so I wanted to take this course to learn about the ethics of like how to do it well. That's one of the things they actually tell you where to position yourself so that you're kind of out of the scene almost, but yet you're still there to help with communication. But it's challenging. And it's challenging for the listeners sometimes because like in your case, you had to like make that switch where some people probably don't even recognize that they have to. So
I don't know.
Anyway.
No, it was interesting to me. And like I said, I remember it. And I remember thinking, I need to be talking to the mom. And so, and then I started facing the mom because the mom was, the mom's kid was going to receive the services. And, a quick thing, this is for Title I schools, and if you, it goes back to No Child Left Behind, and services received if your school is failing, and so it was part of a Title I educational services fair.
Okay, cool.
And so I remember, talking to the mom and facing the mom, so my mouth was facing like I was talking and using the appropriate hand, gestures and stuff like that. So I was actually consciously realizing that I needed to talk to the mom because the interpreter didn't need my services. So yeah, it was interesting. Oh, well, anyway, we could talk about that actually. That may be one of the points that we can talk about when we get through with Sarah's presentation. So we,
Yeah.
um,
Oh.
and the side thing that we're talking about, are we consciously producing that? And that's kind of what I want to go over versus like implicit and explicit and procedural versus declarative. Okay, so discourse management, simplifying, asking questions, and discourse repair is our negotiation of meaning and negotiation of form. And I had a note down here. The concept of the thing, whatever the thing may be, and then the vehicle in which that thing is delivered. So you have a negotiation of meaning, which is a concept, and then negotiation of form, which is the vehicle. So, okay, so that's that. So let's go here. We're going to go into the input and noticing hypothesis, and that is on page 151. We can pre-modify our input by flooding the input flooding the input with exemplars of a specific feature or highlighting a specific form through intonation in oral output or by putting it in bold type. Sarah and I had this experience a couple of weeks ago with our CEP class. We were talking about the verb to do, and we were actually flooding the, not only consciously flooding, but I noticed as I was talking about things, doing things, I was going, and now you are going to do whatever it was. So yeah, and I noticed consciously that I was, emphasizing that verb to do or the forms of do, does, have done, anything like that. So that was that flooding thing, and it was pretty interesting. And that was more declarative knowledge. Anyway, okay, so and then interactually modifying input. Stimulated recall, no, and there's a typo there. Noticing occurs as a result of the negotiation meeting, and that's on page 152. Let me, and like I said, I think it was, and I won't really go into this, but it was really interesting. Let me go into, because I really don't have much more time, because I know Sarah wants to talk. I want to go into implicit and explicit knowledge. Let me go into output right quick before I, go into that. But, we have pushed output, which is concise and socially appropriate. Our modified output is a form of pushed output, and that was explained earlier, how we modify our output based on our input. And we can either receive our correction or we can receive our affirmation. Going into that negotiation of form and negotiation of meaning, and can happen with both form and meaning. Okay, so on page 173, we talk about implicit and explicit knowledge. And this idea was just fascinating to me. I think what I really liked about these chapters is that although it was very theory-based, I really could understand how applicable some of these things were, especially with the examples. I really like the examples because I could actually see that happening. So on page 173, it gives the example of tying a shoe. And I'm going to read this, straight from 173. Our knowledge of how to ride a bicycle, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Our knowledge of how to ride a bicycle or tie a shoelace, is implicit. We know how to do these, but would struggle to explain how. In contrast, our knowledge of history, dates, or of mathematical formulae is explicit. We can tell what we know. Likewise, in the case of language, we may be able to automatically add an S to the third person verbs in the present simple tense without any awareness that we are doing so. Or we may consciously draw on a rule to remind ourselves that an S is needed. So that's that implicit and explicit. and you do that procedural knowledge first. I vaguely remember my dad teaching me how to tie a shoe. I vaguely remember learning how to ride a bike because somebody was behind me, pushing me and keeping me steady, until I kind of got the idea, you're going forward. But there's no really, I remember more about the declarative knowledge in tying my shoe than in riding a bike. And I really don't know if there's any declarative knowledge in riding a bike. But I remember, my dad telling me to make the loop and, put the string around the loop. So anyway, but, with that negotiation of form and the negotiation of meaning, it starts out maybe as declarative, but it goes into procedural. And let's see, here we go. So let's talk about, this is kind of based on the processability theory, and you can find that on page 192. Let me go there. Central to the theory is the claim that the processing strategies are hierarchical in nature and mastered one at a time. So if we have that declarative knowledge and then it transfers to a procedural knowledge, and we are learning explicitly, but then we also can think about how it transfers, and we may use that explicit knowledge to kind of base our implicit knowledge or implicit learning on. Well, if we add a S in this form in the simple present tense, then maybe we can actually use that for our future reference and for future, future simple tense whenever we learn. And then that negotiation of meanings takes place. And then you get that corrective feedback, or you get that affirmation. Yes, that's the right way to do it. Or no, you need to, use by questioning. Oh, is that the right way to do it? Let's see. Let me go. But I really enjoyed this chapter, or I really enjoyed these two chapters. It was just I could see how this was very, very real world, even though it was very theoretical. It was very real world as well. And oh, by the way, declarative knowledge is on page 191, and procedural knowledge is also on page 191, where the declarative knowledge stage involves controlled processing to a final stage where knowledge is automatic. And it was De Keyser in 2007. It also, he argued in 1998, argued that the transformation of declarative knowledge into procedural knowledge is only likely to occur when the cognitive operations involved in the practice actively match those in natural communication. So going back to the processability theory, it's like you really can't, until you really get the gist of it. It's kind of a stop until that, and then you get that, and then you can move on once that knowledge has been transferred into procedural. And you use that input and output to transfer from declarative to procedural. And then you're able to go on, according to processability theory, to the next thing that you do. So anyway, that is it. And I feel like I've talked way too long, so I will hand it over to Sarah.
Alrighty, hello. Thank you both very much for that wonderful content. And today I have a Kahoot for you all. Let me share my screen, and I have the game pin pulled up if you want to go ahead and join.
Let's see.
Yeah, I'd recommend doing it on your phone if you can, Robin.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little easier that way.
That's
yeah.
good. Let's see. Oh.
Or you can do it on your screen, because then I'll probably beat you then.
Aha. Okay, here we go. Let's try this. And hold on.
All right. Everyone is here, I believe. Yep, there's only 2 of you.
PLC5.
Watch me fail miserably.
Okay, true or false? Krashen's input hypothesis says grammar is automatically provided if the input is easily understood.
Oh,
True or false? Yay!
Yeah.
True.
That was on my presentation.
It was. Alrighty.
ah!
I was waiting for the true to pop up because I knew it was true.
Alrighty, here we go. What is pushed output defined by Swain? So output involves pushing out as much content as possible, output that consists of concise and socially appropriate messages, output that's given to a large group of people, or output that is assertive.
Oh,
Yay!
I barely made it.
That's the correct answer. Output consists of precise and socially appropriate messages.
Oh!
Alrighty. Interactionality modified input happens when a native speaker teaches non-native speaker about grammar, a non-native speaker says something wrong and a native speaker corrects it, a non-native speaker corrects a native speaker's spelling, or a non-native speaker asks for clarification during an exchange.
I gotta think about this one a little bit.
I think it's this one.
Modified input asks for clarification. I think it's this one.
Ooh.
Got it!
Yes, I made that tricky on purpose. So non-native speaker says something wrong and a native speaker corrects it would be output modification.
I even had that. Oh.
Yeah, so I know it's very tricky. It's very, so you can just think of it as a non-native speaker saying something is output. So they're being corrected. So that's output modification. And then a non-native speaker asks for clarification. That would be a native speaker is saying something. So that would be input to a non-native speaker.
That's true. I didn't even think about it like that, but you're right. And I even had to slide on it.
I do the same thing all the time. I think I did that last week. I was like, I knew that, but
it says we still believe in you.
We keep going back and forth.
Okay, let's go. This is a multi-select, and it's
double points.
Which of the following are examples of modified output? So, native speaker, can you pass me the spoon? Non-native speaker, what is it? Native speaker, the thing used for soup. Okay, non-native speaker, can you help give directions? Native speaker, excuse me. Non-native speaker, can you help? Non-native speaker, I love hamburgers. Native speaker, hamburgers. Non-native speaker, yes, hamburgers. Or all of these.
Modified output.
Oh, hold on. Oh gosh. Let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna do.
I think it's these.
Oh man.
I think you beat me on that one though. I think you got it done before me.
Alrighty. Well, this, yes. So here, all of these was kind of a trick. I put that in there as a trick, but because the first one would be an example of input modification.
I hope Ms. Early doesn't see how poorly we're doing ours.
Well, I think that makes sense actually, because like you said on the last one, the non-native speaker is asking, right? So that would be more of the input versus output. Versus like the non-native speaker said something and the native speaker didn't understand. So it's like a switch. kind of, that's how I remember it.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like I just said, it's very similar stuff. You just have to like really, it's like details. Anyway, these are like tricky. Okay. Tricky on purpose. Alrighty.
Oh man, I didn't learn a thing, did I?
So negotiation of form is giving someone time to come up with an answer, telling someone they're wrong, a native speaker correcting linguistic problems from a non-native speaker, or a non-native speaker. Yeah, y'all got it. Okay. Yep, so it's correcting linguistic problems. That's negotiation of form, negotiation of, oh no, I forgot the other one. Meaning, negotiation of meaning is the one where you have more of that, it's more of a clarifying. Like this one would just be simple, like in the previous example, I love hamburgers, and then the native speaker correcting hamburgers, like that would be this negotiation of form. Alrighty.
Yeah, because it was more of like an actual like grammar issue or like a pronunciation issue versus like the meaning would just be like not understanding like what was actually said from like, I know what you're saying. I didn't explain it well.
Yeah,
I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Alrighty. So true or false? A non-native speaker capacity for phonological short-term memory has no effect on accuracy gains in oral presentation.
A non-native. I read this somewhere.
I did too. I think I got it right.
No, I probably got it wrong. Hold on. Okay, I'm gonna.
Yay! I both got it right. Yeah. So, I lost my page. Oh no. Boop, boop, boop. I lost the page this was on.
It is on page.
Oh, here it is. I found it. So yeah. This is I need to get my thoughts together. Okay, yeah, it's on 164. And so phonological short-term memory and complex working memory. So Revez, I can't say.
Yeah.
Revez, this is in 2012. They did a study on this. And so those two things, the phonological short-term memory and complex working memory, both had results of accuracy gains. So phonological short-term memory was gains in oral description, and the other one, complex working memory, was gains in written. But yes, okay. I'll keep going. Alrighty. So the noticing hypothesis from Schmidt claims people only care about what matters to them. People can only learn from mistakes. People can only improve if they correct themselves, or people learn about the things they pay attention to. Yay, that was it.
No, that was good. That was fun.
Yeah. So this one, Schmidt talks about, attention and detail and how those things affect learning. Anyway, that was a bad way to describe that. Okay, one more question here. So, true or false? The processability theory claims it doesn't matter in what order you master processing strategies. Wow. That was hard to get out. I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't read.
Processability is hard to say.
It is hard to say. Anyway, so this, as Robin just said, the central claim to the theory is that processing strategies are hierarchical in nature and mastered one at a time, which is opposing the skill learning theory. Well, I won't say oppose, but kind of. I think we're about to get into that because this is the end of my quiz. Let's see. Drum roll. There's no third place. Yay, Robin is second, and The winner is Betsy.
Dun, dun, dun!
Yay. Okay.
That was such a show off.
Alrighty. So that is the end of my little quiz. And let's start talking about our thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. That was awesome. I really like the Kahoot game. It's really fun. For someone competitive like me, and it's about things we just read about, it's a win-win. But anyway,
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the things we had in common, and then we'll see if we can order our 1 through 5s.
Okay.
5.
So definitely noticing is a big common. I would say noticing and output are
yeah.
most common
Yeah.
amongst us.
Yeah, something that we at least all agreed on was like the output is really important. And helping our ELLs have right output and like what's the best strategies for that.
Do you want to talk about negotiations, both the form and meeting? Because we all three talked about that too, I think.
Yeah, I really like the idea of that Schmidt's noticing theory. I think it is important for learning and acquisition. Because like Sarah kind of just even said, like, if you don't notice that there's an issue, how are you to correct it? She kind of even just did it in her quiz just now. Like, what is noticing theory? And that was like one of her answers. Like, people, like learners have to notice. They have to pay attention. They have to see it, see that there's an error. So that I think is called Schmidt's noticing hypothesis or something.
Right. Yeah.
I think that would be one of my 5 personally. I think that's a really good one.
I think that one and output.
Where is it? And you were talking about like, and that goes back to the unmodified and modified output. Well, we modify based on our feedback and whether we affirm or correct. And then we noticed, it all seems just so intertwined. So.
Yeah, agreed. So we agreed noticing hypothesis is important, and maybe like the output hypothesis then, and we could dive more into that about in our paper that we write about why we think that's important. We could talk about modified versus unmodified, because that plays a role in the output hypothesis. So it could be like that could be one of ours. Let's see what else. Oh, one that I don't think I think you touched on it a little bit, Robin, was the I wrote it down. You said it. Oh, the skill learning theory, because you were talking about like tying your shoe.
Yeah, I talked more about the processability, but we can go into skill learning.
Yeah, let's see maybe we talk about that, what that looks like. Because that also, because you were talking about procedural knowledge and declarative knowledge, and that's kind of what this theory is referring to. If you go to page 191, it says it draws on the distinction of between declarative and procedural knowledge and between controlled and automatic processes discussed earlier in the chapter. So this comes from chapter 8. And it says the theory claims that language learning is like any other form of learning, and it involves a progression from an initial declarative knowledge stage involving controlled processing to a final stage where knowledge is automatic, which like, I think, Sarah, you and I can definitely relate to that as language learners ourselves. Well, and you too, I guess, Robin, because you're learning Spanish, you said. Kind of. You're in the declarative knowledge stage, maybe, not the automatic. Yes, but yeah, like how it is something that you're constant receiving. We talked about this in the processability theory, I think earlier, or was it the, what was it called?
That's skill learning, declarative knowledge versus procedural knowledge. But sometimes I think that sometimes you kind of get stuck, and that's where the processability theory comes in. You get stuck in that declarative knowledge state, maybe until you understand the why. I don't know.
Yeah, because they kind of are similar. I think maybe where the why is it so hard to say? Processability theory differs from the skill learning theory is I think it's more augmented. The processability one is, it's more like you're either this or this, where like skill learning kind of just is like more gradual maybe, or it's like more fluid. Like it's not so augmented.
Yeah,
Does that make
makes
sense?
sense.
Where I think out of the two, I like the skill learning one better. And maybe they are kind of similar, I don't know, but
Okay.
Well, I do kind of agree though with like the processability theory saying that it's in stages. It says right here like failure to master low-level procedure blocks access to high-level procedures. So like when you're learning a language, if you can't get pronunciation of like, we'll say like you are coming from like Chinese or Japanese and learning like a more romantic language, if you can't get the individual letters and how they interact with each other,
Right.
like how can you progress into like actually saying a sentence? So if you think about it like that, I don't want to say like one is better, like more importantly, like they're obviously everything we talk about, everything is important, but like I do kind of agree with that. I think a little bit more is that like if you don't master the basics, like how can you get into more advanced?
Okay. I think that's actually a good, that's a good point.
Here's something, it says here on page 193, right above the table, if you would like to join me. In other words, so it was prefaced, processability theory is a theory of implicit versus, or rather than, explicit learning. So that goes, I guess, more like to language acquisition and creation versus the actual learning.
Well, and if you look just above that, I just saw this too. It says the strength of processability theory is that it provides not only an explanation for attested sequences for acquisition, but also has predictive power, which kind of goes back to Sarah. It's like, well, if you probably can get the building blocks, you most likely are going to be able to like maybe say certain sentences, right?
Yeah.
If you know like the verb tense is present tense and you have the vocabulary, you probably can put those together and end up making a good coherent sentence.
Using that simple present tense S at the end.
Okay, you've changed my mind. Processability theory is important. Look at you guys. It's flipped. Okay, so let's put that one down. Processability theory.
Skill learning and processability.
You want to put both of them?
Yeah.
Do you think those go under a similar umbrella, or should we have them separate?
Well, I'll tell you what, we can, let's put them under the same umbrella because, I think even though they're like rings, really. Like links. They're two separate things, but, if they're linked together, they.
Right. Well, they both kind of deal with that declarative knowledge and procedural. Okay, so we'll put those together for now. We may change, but okay. The hardest part, I think, this week is going to be what ones are the most important, because I feel like all of them are important, Okay.
So we have noticing, we have output, we have skill learning and processability theories.
Oh, they are separate in the book, but are they under? Oh, but they're both kind of under that cognitive theory.
Yeah, they're like subheadings.
Yeah.
So we also talked about input hypothesis a little and interaction hypothesis.
Yeah, interaction.
So what we can do is go back to, yes, let's talk about input too. Because, in order to have output, you need to have input, whether your output, and that feedback. So you talk and you have the output, or you have the input, and then you have the output. And then your output may be correct or incorrect, and so then you get that feedback, which is input, and then that negotiation meeting and negotiation of form and la la la. So
okay, are we thinking just like the straight up input hypothesis by crashing? Is that the one? Was that actually talked about in curriculum?
Yes, it was.
It was? Okay.
was. But then you have the non-interactive and interactive,
Yeah.
page 144. And that's really not what I was talking about, because that looks more like it's reading.
Oh, yeah,
But
it is
I'm
in there.
the interactive input, which is more speaking. And then you have that negotiation of form. Because
Okay.
so with the reading, it looks like you just have that straight crash and where you're just reading and you're not producing that output,
Mhm.
which is good. You have the reading, the 3 examples on page 144 about catfish have gills and lungs. And if you read, that's the unmodified, the non-interactive, where you're just reading. And that's that, Crush's input. But then you have the interactive input where you're also producing output. 145, and she talks about the dialogue between the native speaker and the non-native speaker on mushrooms.
Right.
So
Yeah, so maybe for our last two then, we do input hypothesis, which does come from Krashen, however we say his name. And yeah, I think all of us can recognize that comprehensible input is important. And I think all theories in their own way also recognize that. But then, yeah, like there has to be this interaction piece too. So maybe our last one be interaction hypothesis.
okay,
Because like if there's no interaction and there's no activities that are kind of forcing that, or maybe not forcing,
right.
but encouraging that.
And really, I think that's the umbrella. That all this you notice, you produce the output, you acquire a skill.
You have to have
and
good
then,
input. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And then you need a space to be able to utilize all those things.
Yeah.
And if there's not like 2 speakers, there's not this interaction, then how can you notice you're making errors? How do you have this correction with this output, modified output?
Yeah.
Or I think you called it pre-modified input.
Yeah.
Like how can we alter this so it makes more sense to our learner as the native speaker? Yeah, I think all of these play together really well.
I think so too.
Now, if we're talking about the 5, so we've got Schmidt's noticing hypothesis, output hypothesis, input hypothesis, the processability theory, and interaction. So those are our 5. Interaction hypothesis. What, if you guys had to order 1 through 5,
I would say interaction would be number 1.
Interaction? I was going to say output hypothesis. Like
I
output.
am torn, you guys, between the 2 of those.
I see well, I guess actually, no, I was thinking about output modification, and I guess that would be under interaction, right?
Because you kind of have to interact in order to.
Yeah, because you can't have output modification without interaction.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I do agree with you, Robin.
Well, and I think what I do like, so in my diagram, I had wrote, and this came from the book, that the interaction hypothesis proposes that input and output are equally important. So like they're both needed.
Yeah.
But then in the context of more of a social setting, like in the context of having this interaction between non-native and native, or even a mixture of that, right? So I think we're all on the same page. I think interaction should go first.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
with interaction, you receive not only that meaning, but you also receive the form.
right.
Later.
So so interaction hypothesis, we're going to list as number 1. Then we've got left Schmidt's noticing hypothesis, output hypothesis, processability theory, and skill learning, or input.
I would say processability and skills. I think we put it at the skills learning.
Kind
theory.
of again that sequence of building blocks.
I do think that's important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like having the steps, like doing the correct steps,
Right. And then getting that feedback and then being able to acquire that skill and then move on.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that like teaching learner kind of look too. Like when we were looking at like you mentioned, riding a bike or tying your shoe. It's like, well, if someone doesn't show you, then how are you supposed to even try? Like, how are you supposed to even like attempt to ride your bike, tie your shoe, speak a second language? So yeah, you have to have like this some structure. And then once you have some structure, then you can feel free to try it and then get some feedback.
And it kind of goes the other way, so we know how to use verb tenses before we even learn about the formal names for a verb tense, right? Or we know that you crawl under the table before you even know that under is a preposition or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so we got interaction, processability, and skill learning. So that's interaction. Okay.
I think next maybe should be noticing, maybe.
Okay.
I was going to say the same thing. Yep,
Yeah.
I think noticing.
Okay. Yeah, and then output and input, but those kind of seem equal.
If I had to put them, I think I would say input over output, because as you were saying, Robin, like you were talking about input and how it's like important, because like I think in terms of output, what's really important with output is that it's being modified. Like, so if they put output that's incorrect, it's being corrected, and that would be an interaction. So although I think outputs, obviously they are really like almost equal, just like that interaction theory said, like Betsy just said, like they're both like kind of equal, but I think I would put input a little bit higher. That's just
I'm struggling with it. I think because like I'm looking at it from more of a teacher / tutor perspective, because like I think my main goal is to have good output for my students. Like I want them to have good output. So I find myself correcting them often.
Yeah.
And maybe that can come off a little severe sometimes, or like a little bit like too picky. However, like I find, they use examples here. I think I wrote it down the page. Hold on. Page 159, I think it was. Yes, output hypothesis, and that I remember I went over those examples.
Oh yeah, the nuclear bomb thing. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean that would be more like, I guess like that kind of looks like it could be, I guess, input too in a way, I guess, because like the learner's asking for clarification.
Right.
But like in the second example, in example 6, like they wouldn't have probably caught on that they said come instead of came, unless the native speaker pointed it out.
True.
And like, I don't know, like in the classroom, I find that happening often, where like they don't catch that they made an error until I point it out to them.
But Betsy, when I read that example, and I'm going to admit, I never even, I on like line 3, where it says the learner, but she never come back. I did not notice, even as a native English speaker, I did not notice that was a grammar, that was wrong grammar. What I concentrated on instead was that the clarification of the, I guess it's not really superlative, but she was never come back. She never came back. She never came back. He was very sad, as if this non-native speaker is, oh my gosh, she's never going to come back. And it was the clarification of the subconscious kind of thing going on there. And I can't really put it into words, but like the superlative, or she never came back, more of the timeline or the plot of the story, whatever the story may be. I really didn't notice the grammar, but I should have, but she was asking, the non-native speaker was maybe asking for clarification of, why did that character in the story or whatever it is never come back? What happened? And that native speaker was asking more for clarification of the element of the story rather than a correction in grammar. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But then I guess like to further kind of go off this point, like if you had said to your speaker then, like let's say this was the same scenario and you had like said to your speaker the correct way, like
Right.
what do you think they would have caught that? Or do you think it wouldn't have been caught until you corrected them? Like if I had said like, oh, I just came back, they might have said like, oh, you just come back? Like they might have not caught that, like that was like the point I was trying to make.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Versus if you correct them, like do they then more? But then again, I think they also talked about that a little bit of sometimes you don't see short-term effects. Like they may repeat the same thing wrong, like during the same class time.
Yeah.
But then later they might remember it. So they're saying long-term effects, it's helpful. If I remember right from the reading.
Yeah. No. I think you're right. I was just when I picked up on that, I honestly did not pick up on the grammar fallacy. I should have, because that's the whole point. But
Yeah.
what I was looking at is the story element. You know, the I don't know if it's really called superlative. I don't know what it's called, but oh, you never came back, like that person was asking for clarification on the content
Right.
of, and what is that?
Because this also kind of goes with
It's just too much.
Well, I was gonna say, does it kind of also go through the negotiation a little bit of like you trying to like negotiate so they understand?
Form of a negotiation meeting, and so yeah, I've got like theories swimming all in my head, and I just it's just awful.
Yeah, because like here in the example 159 says, example 5, the one with the nuclear bomb, says shows how modified output can arise in negotiation triggered by a learner's failure to comprehend another speaker's utterance. So I don't know. I think it's pretty important. I think I put it personally. This is just my argument, but that I personally would put it before input.
Okay.
But you can disagree with me. We can write that on our. We can write if we want to, Sarah. We could do that. We can write that on our response.
I thought of them as a cycle, really, and I wish I had like a drawing app on my computer here, so we can like I could draw just a cycle, and it's really, you know, there's no. I just think of them as equal, so it really doesn't matter which one, because I really do think of them as equal.
So hey, that's fine. We can do it like that. So we're going to say our top 3 are interaction hypothesis, processability theory, and skill learning. We're put them together, noticing hypothesis, and then we're going to put 3, 4, and 5, the bottom, and we can say, okay, Robin and Sarah think they're more equal. And then I can just say, I think output comes it's a little more important. And that's okay, because we can differ on that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And we don't actually even know what's right. Right? So like this is all theory.
I don't think there is a right or wrong. I don't know.
Right, there you go.
And like I see where you're coming from, Betsy, on like output being a little bit more than input. But I really do, like, I can't pick. Like, I know at first I said, you know, I think input is a little bit more than output, but then you changed my mind. But then Robin also changed my mind on I think they're just equal. Like, I think they're just equal.
Yeah, I'm not here to force anyone to make any changes, so I'm just giving my 2 cents, but in a hopefully a kind way. But okay, I think that sounds good. So Miss Early, in conclusion, we have chose our 5. Number 1, we think interaction hypothesis is number 1, most important, and we think it's kind of the large umbrella over the whole thing, because you have to have interaction to even have any of these. Number 2, processability theory and skill learning. We're putting those together because we see how they tie together. 3, noticing hypothesis. And then we've got 4 and 5, kind of at a tie. We have input hypothesis and output hypothesis. Me leaning towards probably output at more of like a 4. But we will put that in our paper. We thank you for watching our discussion again this week. And yeah, friends, see you next week.
Thanks.